The image was logged at 14:03. At first it looked harmless, a mountain photograph, snow glare, compression noise, dark rock. Nothing in the frame that should have triggered a site-level emergency. Then an analyst paused the image, zoomed into the upper right quadrant, and found a human face so small it should have been meaningless. According to the reconstructed incident timeline, that was the moment the breach truly began. Not when alarms sounded, not when personnel started running, not when steel doors failed. The moment someone understood what they were looking at. That is the first thing most people misunderstand about SCP-096. They think the horror begins when it starts moving. They imagine screaming, impacts, shattered concrete, a monster sprinting down a corridor. But if you read the case the way the Foundation would, the irreversible moment arrives earlier and much more quietly. It begins with observation. Within Foundation records, SCP-096 is not treated like an ordinary hostile entity. Its containment procedures already reveal the real problem. It is kept inside an airtight steel cube. No video surveillance is permitted inside the cell. No optical tools are allowed near it without specific approval. Personnel do not visually monitor the subject in the usual sense. They rely on indirect systems, pressure sensors, laser detectors, presence checks, anything that confirms location without risking exposure. That level of caution tells you exactly what kind of anomaly this is. The danger is not just physical contact. The danger is informational. If a person sees SCP-096's face, whether directly, through a video recording, or even in a photograph, the event has already started. The subject enters visible emotional distress. It covers its face. It screams, it cries, it vocalizes incoherently. Then, after roughly 1 to 2 minutes, it begins moving toward the viewer. From that point on, the exposed person is no longer just a witness. They are the destination. And according to the file, no known material or method can stop SCP-096 from reaching them. Distance does not help. Locked doors do not help. Conventional force does not help. The Foundation's own language is blunt. Once the response begins, progress cannot be impeded by any known means. That single rule transforms SCP-096 from a creature into a procedural disaster. Because it means the breach can begin anywhere an image can travel. A field camera, a recovery archive, a research terminal, a printed debrief packet, a surveillance review station, a careless screenshot sent to the wrong person. The actual point of failure may look almost administrative. A document opened, a frame enlarged, a detail verified 1 second too long. That is what makes this case ideal for reconstruction. The terror does not come from chaos first, it comes from a chain of understanding. Imagine the analyst who notices the face. At the start, there is still room for denial. Maybe the image is too degraded to count. Maybe it is not really the face. Maybe the angle is wrong. Maybe exposure through a fragment that small does nothing. Maybe the file can still be closed and flagged without consequences. Then the room gets quieter, because everyone there knows the same containment doctrine. Everyone there knows the rule they have just violated, and everyone understands that if the exposure was real, they are no longer discussing risk. They are discussing time remaining. That 1 to 2 minute delay is one of the cruelest parts of SCP-096. In most emergencies, a warning creates options. In this one, a warning mostly creates comprehension. The exposed viewer can be isolated, but isolation does not solve anything. They can be moved, but movement does not solve anything. They can be locked behind reinforced doors, evacuated deeper underground, strapped into a transport vehicle, flown out, hidden, sedated, restrained. None of that answers the actual problem. The anomaly is not searching the site blindly. It already knows exactly where it is going. This is the point where ordinary fear turns into Foundation fear. Not fear of dying in the abstract. Fear of becoming the center of an expanding containment event. Because now every person in the room has to think 2 steps ahead. Who else saw the same frame? Was the image mirrored on another monitor? Did the archival software generate a thumbnail? Did anyone walk behind the analyst at the wrong moment? Was the file transmitted before the review began? How many people are about to become part of the same chain reaction without even realizing it yet? This is why the Foundation treats SCP-096 exposure as a secrecy crisis as much as a casualty crisis. The official documentation warns that a mass chain reaction could produce both catastrophic civilian loss and an open breach of Foundation secrecy. That is why retrieval is designated alpha priority. Not because SCP-096 is merely hard to fight, but because the event can multiply through observation itself. In other words, SCP-096 contaminates the process of knowing. The more a system depends on imaging, verification, review, and evidence handling, the more dangerous the anomaly becomes. A normal monster can be tracked with cameras. A normal breach can be understood by gathering visual proof. With SCP-096, the same tools that make an institution competent can become the mechanism of failure. That is where the human side of the incident becomes more frightening than the entity itself. Not everyone in the room reacts the same way. One person insists the exposure was too minor to count. Another begins wiping screens that are already irrelevant. Someone asks whether artistic depictions trigger the response, trying to bargain with the rule by turning evidence into ambiguity. Someone else watches the clock. Someone tries to pull the viewer out of the room as if speed alone can beat inevitability. And someone, somewhere, has to start documenting what happens next while knowing that documentation may itself be hazardous. That is a uniquely Foundation kind of horror. Procedure and terror occupying the same room. If we reconstruct the breach the way an internal analyst would, the event unfolds in layers. First, the accidental exposure. Then the silence. Then the recognition that the room is no longer safe, not because of what is inside it, but because of what has already been seen. Then the countdown period, where every available response feels active but useless. Then command decisions, all of them shifting from prevention to consequence management. Corridors cleared, non-essential personnel moved. Sensitive records isolated, response teams redirected. Possible route maps generated, impact sectors estimated. Not because anyone believes the anomaly can be stopped, but because casualties may still be redistributed. That distinction matters. The Foundation is not really asking how to win. It is asking how to survive its own failure in the most controlled way possible. This is where a lesser version of the story would turn into action horror. A lot of SCP content makes that mistake. It becomes all chase, all noise, all spectacle. But a serious breach documentary works differently. The most effective scenes happen before contact. A corridor with nobody in it yet. A sealed door that everyone knows will not matter. A researcher erasing a monitor with shaking hands. A redacted incident card updating from possible exposure to confirmed exposure. A site map with a route line no one wants to finish drawing. A witness trying to stay clinically calm while their body already knows they are out of time. That is what makes SCP-096 feel plausible inside its own fiction. The rule is simple enough to understand instantly, but severe enough to break every ordinary assumption about safety. You do not survive by staying far away. You do not survive by hiding. You do not survive by fortifying the room. Once you understand the rule, the shape of the entire incident changes. And maybe that is the deeper reason SCP-096 remains so effective. The terror is not only that something unstoppable is coming. It is that the fatal moment is informational. A glance, a corner of a photograph, a detail so small it should not matter. The disaster begins before the corridor shakes, before the first impact, before anyone in command can even finish debating whether the exposure was real. In most horror, recognition saves you. You identify the threat, and that gives you time to act. With SCP-096, recognition is the threat. The better you understand what you have just seen, the clearer it becomes that the outcome may already be decided. That is why this is not just a monster case. It is a case about systems failing at the exact point where they try to become more precise. It is about analysts, archivists, security officers, and researchers trapped inside a logic where competence itself can trigger catastrophe. The Foundation does not lose control because it is careless. It loses control because it is doing what it was built to do. Observe, record, verify, understand. SCP-096 turns those virtues into liabilities. So if we ask what one image could really do inside the SCP Foundation, the answer is not just that it could kill a viewer, it could start a site-wide cascade of procedural collapse. It could turn routine review into a containment event. It could force an institution built on documentation to fear its own records. And that is the final, unsettling interpretation of the case. SCP-096 is terrifying not because it runs, not because it breaks walls, not because it leaves nothing behind. It is terrifying because the breach begins at the moment a human being successfully notices reality. The photograph looks harmless. The report looks routine. The analyst only zoomed in to confirm a detail, but inside a proper Foundation incident file, that is exactly how the disaster starts.